Of course, Shameless is at its best when the stories are complex and focus on the characters. IMDb's list, on the other hand, says that it's at its worst in the last 2 seasons when it gets too silly and tries to cover too much story ground at the expense of drama, character development, and substance. So, using IMDb as a guide, here are the worst parts of Shameless and the best parts. First, let's talk about the best. First, just like the Pilgrims Intended, Season 2, Episode 11, and Survival of the Fittest, Season 3, Episode 12. The episode of Shameless is rated around a 9 on IMDb and is called the most emotional of the series. According to Paste Magazine's Tim Basham, the show's heartlessness and compassion rise to a peak befitting a season-ending episode. Samantha McPhee of CBR called the episode one that broke our hearts, and a Redditor said it must be the darkest Thanksgiving they've ever seen. We think this story sticks with people because it's a compelling mix of outrageous comedy and raw, visceral tragedy. In the movie Survival of the Fittest, which gets around a 9 on IMDb, Frank's life of drinking too much finally catches up with him. Even though the doctor warned him about renal failure and a damaged liver, he drinks all day with lip to celebrate the high school graduation of his oldest son. Joshua Alston of the AV Club praised the story, calling it the finest finale Shameless has ever delivered, closing some loops while leaving others open in interesting ways and providing well-earned character moments. Alan Sepinwall of Uprocks seems to agree with this, calling the story extremely heartfelt in places, raucous and disgusting in others, and just emotionally complicated throughout. In Frank's case, the episode shows how hard real change can be, even, or maybe especially, when it's necessary and could save someone's life. Next, Crazy Love, Season 5, Episode 6, and Requiem for a Slut, Season 7, Episode 12. Allison Johnson of The Young Folks says that Crazy Love, which is rated around a 9 on IMDb, is the best example of the epitome of Shameless on its A-game, at its best. Michael Wampler of Smash Cut says, this episode is packed with emotional gut punches and is just astounding on a scene-by-scene basis, and we couldn't agree more. From Fiona's cheating to Ian's scary descent into manic depression, the episode has a painfully urgent story with a hard-hitting drama, complex characters, and a lot of emotional depth underneath its outrageous comedy. With an IMDb score of around 9, this episode could have been the series finale. Reddit user UHawk Germlab says it would have been an excellent ending to the show. Christina Ciamicelli of Entertainment Weekly agrees, calling the story a nearly perfect tearjerker, with laughs, fights, love, reconciliation, and perhaps most importantly, the Gallagher siblings appreciating and supporting each other. By the end of the story, Fiona and Frank have made up. Lip is ready to go back to AA, Carl has found a good path for himself through military school, and Fiona is about to start a new business as a local landlord. Also, Ken and V have returned to the group. What's the one thing we're missing? Galavich. Finally, Happily Ever After, Season 7, Episode 11, Emily, Season 4, Episode 11, and Lazarus, Season 4, Episode 12. Myles McNutt of the AV Club calls this the Shameless episode where dreams go to die. But, you know, in a good, gut-wrenching, fictional way where viewers can enjoy stories with many layers of satisfying endings to arcs that span several episodes or seasons. In the end, this episode hits home because it shows that Shameless is at its best when it mixes outrageous comedy with urgent, character-driven drama that focuses on cultural commentary about class and how poverty can make life's problems worse. Emily now, it's easy to see why this is the second best episode of the show, based on IMDb's list. Character moments like Mickey standing up to his bigoted father and the social worker's quiet supportive Lip, as well as the gut-wrenching conversations between Frank and Emily are all very real and moving. Joshua Alston of the AV Club says it all comes down to the writer's willingness to be ambitious and bold, and make something spectacular with a few characters rather than flit about the whole ensemble. Lazarus, the last episode of the 4th season, is Shameless at its very best. It has an impressive rating of just below 9.5 on IMDb, emotional storylines, powerful character development, and just the right amount of absurd comedy. Alan Sepinwall of Uprock says that this meaningful story about a family has a lot of wonderful performances, patient character arcs, and indelible moments, and he's right. And while David Crow of Den and Geeks says the 4th season of, he also says that even though this season of Shameless isn't the most stable, it feels like the most honest one, and that makes it a great collection of what is the best mix of comedy and drama on any medium right now. Now to some of the worst episodes in the series. First, Sleep Well My Prince, For Tomorrow You Will Be King, Season 10, Episode 2, and Slaughter, Season 11, Episode 5. Myles McNutt of the AV Club has some harsh things to say about Sleep Well My Prince, For Tomorrow You Shall Be King, which has an IMDb rating of less than 7.5. He complains about the lack of depth depth, the flat humor, and the aimless stories that don't help characters grow or move important story arcs forward. McNutt says that the show is more of a comedic drama than a dramatic or outrageous comedy, and that its best storylines, organized around the very real stakes of a family living in poverty. He also says that Shameless has lost its heart at the start of its 10th season. Slaughter is another disappointing episode of Shameless. It's currently getting around a 7 on IMDb, and it comes in the middle of a disappointing final season. Critics like Myles McNutt of the AV Club are annoyed that the entry is all about quick thrills, loose logic, and filling time. It's easy to see why. Basically, the long, drawn-out stories and the tendency toward more absurdity and chaos take away from the once compelling drama and make the once complex characters less interesting. Next, This is Chicago, Season 11, Episode 1, and Adios Gringos, Season 10, Episode 6. The plots in This is Chicago, which has an IMDb rating of about 7, are thin and hard to follow. Worse, it has COVID-19, which makes it hard to breathe. Since we're still in the middle of this pandemic in 2022, we think it was a questionable choice to include it in the show's fictional setting. We're still feeling the effects of COVID, so it could be said that the writers don't yet have the distance or understanding they need to write about it in a meaningful way. At least for Shameless, the result is a lack of emotional and intellectual depth. It's a noticeable loss that's made worse by the fact that the episode tries to tell so many different stories at once. Next, Adios Gringos, some Reddit users complain about Carl's character arc and the lack of interesting storylines. You, Nonsensical Wanderless, explains why this episode is near the bottom of IMDb's list. It's lost so much of that emotional grit and compelling storytelling. Focusing on plots and characters in a democratic way instead of a diplomatic way leads to stories that are all over the place and don't push, challenge, or change our characters in interesting or well-earned ways. Finally, A Little Gallagher Goes a Long Way, Season 10, Episode 4, Oh Captain, My Captain, Season 10, Episode 9, and Father Frank, Full of Grace, Season 11, Episode 12. In this episode, Debbie tries to get child support for Franny's father, Derek, but finds out he joined the army, got drunk, drove a tank into Suez Canal, and drowned. Myles McNutt of the AV Club says the title of this episode may be A Little Gallagher Goes a Long Way, but the truth is that the show struggled to justify its longevity because it won't develop real long-term storylines that make real changes. Even though it's a harsh assessment, it may be fair, since it's clear that the lack of Fiona Emmy Rossum and the fact that there are too many stories have made the 10th season feel less balanced and more shallowly absurd. Daniel Kurland of Den and Geeks gives Oh Captain, My Captain a sad 2.5 out of 5 stars, saying that it feels like a fraction of an episode, and that the progress is so incidental, other than Debbie's storyline, that there's nothing to really get excited over here. The main problem with this episode is that the stories don't have enough emotional depth or a sense of urgency. Father Frank, Full of Grace, the last episode of the series, has a terrible rating that doesn't even reach a 6.5. It's at the very bottom of IMDb's ranked list. Don't get confused. This episode has the same name as the last episode for the first season, which has a much higher rating of 8.8. The reviews for this one are harsh, which makes sense. Myles McNutt of the AV Club gave it a solid D and said that Emmy Rossum's absence makes the end of an important 11-year run bitter rather than bittersweet. Daniel Kurland of Den and Geeks, on the other hand, disagrees with the critics and says it's a celebratory finale that's emotional, beautiful, crude, and chaotic. And in that way, a great way to end the show. Well, that's it for today, guys. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Till next time, cheers!